Hi, my name is Sylvia Jones, Director of Elevate Bermuda. I've been living and working in Bermuda since 2005, and in 2007 I founded Corporate Concierge. Since then, my team and I have successfully relocated some of the key figures in Bermuda's business world. Through a mutual friend, I was introduced to James Fitzsimons, my co-director at Elevate. We have offices in Hamilton, Bermuda, and in Dublin, Ireland. 2020 brought both change and opportunity for everyone. At Elevate, we launched a career advice company called Elevate Career Advice, and from there created the Career Scoop. We wanted to be able to bring career advice from leaders of industry right to people's doorstep. We truly believe that learning from other people is one of the best ways to learn. I'm here with my co-host, James Fitzsimons, and with today's guest, Dave Gribben. Dave is the co-founder of Below the Line, a company focused on raising consciousness, inner potential, and performance, one step at a time. Below the Line is a partnership founded by a group of colleagues who share a collective belief that brilliant people make brilliant leaders. They work with individuals and companies who are inspired by this idea and who are motivated by a desire to understand and develop themselves as people in order to be more effective and fulfilled in their professional and personal lives. Dave, I'm delighted to welcome you to the show.
Good to be here.
Great. Thank you for joining us. I appreciate it. Dave, in order to start, I'd love for you to give us a brief overview of your career to date, maybe touching on some of the highs and lows and some of the things that you've learned.
Yeah. So first of all, 41 years in the workforce. I remember writing a little blog post up onto LinkedIn last year in 2019. I can't believe I'm 41 years in the workforce, 1979. Left school after stumbling through my leaving cert is the best way to describe it. And I had a part-time job at the time. So that became a full-time job because basically there was nothing else for me. I wasn't at the time, I didn't enjoy school and I wasn't particularly academic. I don't think I saw the real purpose of it at that age. And so that led me into the whole world of kitchens, believe it or not, designing and fitting kitchens of all things. And part-time as well, I went and studied architecture. And for those who can remember back in the early 80s, if you were studying to be an architect, you were studying to become unemployed, basically, because most architects were being laid off back in the 80s. And then what happened to me in 1982, I bumped into somebody through a sort of a network that I had of friends and stumbled into the life assurance industry. And somebody said, hey, would you be up for selling life assurance, literally door to door? And what happened after 6 months was I worked through a number of companies and found myself with a full-time job in a major life assurance company, which became Canada Life, actually, in Ireland subsequently. And so that got me into that was an eye-opener for me. And I spent many years up till 1991 thoroughly enjoying working in that area and found myself getting into the whole world of management. So somebody tapped me on my shoulder back in the late 80s and sort of said, hey, you could be the manager of this team, much to my surprise, probably along with lots of others. And I was managing I became a sales director at a very, very young age. And so I had a boss that saw something good in me, saw some leadership qualities way before I saw them, I don't mind saying. And I found myself the leader of the sales team I was in for 2 years running up to 1991. And then Ulster Bank came and headhunted me to build out their bank assurance business and their private banking business. And I enjoyed 11 lovely years there where really I was let run and build a business myself because the bank didn't thoroughly understand that business and sort of let me at it, trusted me to do it. And I thoroughly enjoyed that, but one of the happiest times of my career. And then in 2003, I left the bank and joined a small business. I had lots of things that were bubbling up inside me. And I should say that back in 1983, I hired a coach, prompted by my now father-in-law. I hired a coach. And through the coaching I was getting all through those years, a lot of things were awakening inside me. And what was one of the things that was awakening inside me was I needed more autonomy. I needed more self-development. I needed to be around more excitement. I needed more variety. And that got me to break out on my own with a bunch of guys to build out a business called ITC, which was another financial service business, in effect, in the pensioner trustee space, and did that up till the famous crash of 2009. And so I would say all the way up to that point were a lot of highs, loved the work, loved building teams, loved the progress. It was all about growth. I got the opportunity to take on a master's degree in the mid-90s along the way, sponsored by the bank, and did that in Trinity College. And that was an eye-opener for me around the science of leadership and management. And they were all really, really good times. There was a few lows along the way, but nothing particularly remarkable. And then in 2009, we had the crash, and that was a tough time. And it was a tough time for lots of reasons. It was a pivotal time for me, but it was a tough time because we had 130 people in the business, private business, and we had to let half them go. And when you're running a private business, you know, you've personally recruited most of those people, and many of them have become very close friends. So having to let nearly half your workforce go in a very short space of time was a really low point. From a business point of view, it was the right thing to do because that business remains the biggest in its marketplace today. But it's a really tough thing to do at a human level. We were proud of the way we did it, but it was a definite low point, I don't mind saying, after so many highs all the way to that point. And another, just as you mentioned, Sylvia, low points, I should have said early in my career, the first 3 jobs I had after my first job, which was in that kitchen business, I was made redundant 3 times in 18 months. I sort of flew past that earlier on. So I was at a creditors meeting twice for my salary, my weekly salary, if you don't mind. And I was on a dole queue for 6 weeks. And I hated that. Humiliating, borrowing off my mother, trying to fund a car that I had bought myself, losing my independence, sense of independence, awful time, didn't like it. But unbelievably pivotal time for me, because what it knocked out of me was a sense of needing a lot of security, because when you lose your job 3 times in a row, all because, by the way, companies had gone bust, you all of a sudden assume there are no safe jobs out there anymore. And that was a disappointment at the time because my dad had spent his entire career in one job, one company. And but it was a good thing in retrospect because it made me much more like a free-range chicken, if you like. You know, I was much happier to get out there and run around and do my own thing. And that the spirit of that bubbled up later in my career. So 09 came along, and then I got into the work I now do, and how, as you and I have come across each other doing this work, which was really a focus on, you know, so a coach asking me, what would you do if you did more things you love doing? Simple question. And it's an interesting career question, I think. And the answer was, at one level, it was, oh, that's a very idealistic question, but that can't be real. But actually, the answer to it is what I do now, is I would spend more time working with people one-to-one, helping make a real difference in their lives and businesses. I would spend more time around the wider subject of leadership. I'd spend more time around the wider subject of teams. I would spend more time traveling, and that's what got me to your beautiful island in Bermuda and lots of other places besides. And I'd spend more time in different industries. So, you know, and I'd spend more time in the outdoor. So they were some of the answers that came up for me along the way. And that really became the genesis of what I now do. So that's probably a quick fly through my career. So that's 41 years of it. And so the last 11 years, I've been, you know, evolving into a lot of the same work I've been doing and had been doing in organizations, you know, before that.
Very good. You mentioned, Dave, there, someone tapped you on the shoulder, and that's a really lovely sort of analogy for, in a way, mentorship. To what extent do you feel mentorship sort of contributes to career progression and how it has impacted your, I suppose, personal and professional growth and development?
Oh, I'm very clear about this in my own mind. I'm absolutely sure I would not be sitting here talking to you now, except that I had been enlightened to the idea that you should put a good team of people around you. Whether they even know you're on your team or not doesn't matter, is that you know you've got a good team around you. Now, I was lucky because back in 1982/3, around that time, I hired a coach called Dennis Cahill. And Dennis was, I think, one of 1 or 2 coaches in Dublin or maybe in Ireland at that time. And I wouldn't have found Dennis, only that somebody pointed me at him and said, hey, you guys should meet up. But that got me open to this idea that you can accelerate an awful lot of your own learning and ambitions and make better decisions if you're prepared to put people around you who have your best interests at heart, but who will challenge you with that in mind. So Dennis was one, but there were many others along the way that I've hired professionally and sort of more informally. and absolutely couldn't have got this far. And in general, career advice I'd give to people would be, put a good team of people around you. That can be 2 people, 3 people, but make sure you have a good team of people around you. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really true. Tell me, at one point you mentioned you were running the business and had personally recruited most of the team on there.
Yeah.
What were the sort of the key criteria you would have looked at that time when building out your team?
Yeah, I learned. So, up till that point, when you get the opportunity to recruit your own team or your own business halfway through your career, it's a great advantage because you've learned a lot. Well, you haven't learned everything, but I felt I'd learned a lot about recruitment up to that point. And so what I got the opportunity to do was recruit for fit first. In other words, cultural fit first, so that we were really clear about that. We didn't always get it right, but we got it right more often than not. So in other words, are they our type of people? Will they fit with what we're about? Do they believe in what we believe in? Are they here for the right reasons? And so we used to spend a lot of time on making sure they fit. The second thing then was capability. And around capability, sometimes we weren't looking for somebody who was necessarily capable of doing everything that we needed them to do now, but that they had the potential to not only do what we needed them to do now, but go way beyond that into the future. So they had that level of potential. And that was essentially the criteria. So if they were the right fit as people, and if they had the potential to do the job and take the job way beyond where we could currently conceive of it, then, they were going to stand a really good chance of coming on board. So they'd be the 2 things. And they'd be still the 2 thoughts in my mind, because I often sit on interview panels for client companies where I'm asked to be a sort of an objective panelist and, just make sure that the executives of the company aren't, losing their own objectivity in recruiting people.
Yeah. Early on then in your career, you were made redundant 3 times. So that's an awful run of bad luck, if you ask me.
Yes, you could say.
Absolutely. But I mean, in I suppose times that we're in now as a result of the global pandemic, there are people in Ireland and people here in Bermuda and around the world who are facing redundancy or have already been made redundant. Having gone through that experience yourself, both on the sort of receiving side of it, but also having to make a business decision as a business leader. How can people best cope with that type of decision when it sort of faces them and comes into their lives?
Yeah, it's a cracking great question. I have an answer to it, and I'll caveat by saying, if there was somebody listening now who has just been made redundant, it's really hard to hear anything in that moment, I think. And, so first of all, I'd say, don't take it personally. Now, if somebody's listening to this and hears this now, they might say, well, it's very hard not to take it personally when it's happened to you. But if it's a genuine redundancy, it's typically the role has been made redundant or a set of roles have been made redundant. So you'll tend probably not to take it personally over time. I think, the counsel I give people is nearly ask yourself the question, why is this happening for me rather than why is this happening to me? And I think, it's probably understandable if you think of the 7 stages of grief, it's understandable to get into the why is this happening to me for a while, but you sort of have to move beyond that and maybe seek a little bit of help through friends, through mentors or whatever. How do I move to the place where I start answering the question, why is this happening for me? Because in a lot of the experience I have is that when I'm coaching people who've been made redundant, and often I am coaching people who've been made redundant, they realize, in the months following, that's often the best thing that's ever happened to them, even though it's been a really difficult time. There's no taking away from that sometimes, but it's an opportunity to pivot. It's an opportunity to, change direction in career terms. It's an opportunity to take stock. And often the role they've been made redundant, not always, but often, it's a role that they were enjoying, but they could have enjoyed more. So it becomes this great opportunity to reach for higher ground in terms of what's going to fulfill them in their career. But it's about trying to make that transition, to focusing on why is it happening for me rather than to me. And the happening to me piece just takes a bit of time. It takes longer for some than others. I generally would say try and move out of being the victim in it, but you'll understandably feel that at the start, and that's very normal. but trying to help get people around you to help you move out of that reasonably fast.
Yeah, absolutely. I know sometimes it's always about the people we surround ourselves with, and using that as a coping and support mechanism. Moving on, Dave, to work projects that you've most enjoyed or been most proud of over the duration of your career. What would you say they are? Yeah,
a couple. I mean, I've alluded to some of them there. One, I think getting the opportunity in 1991 to build out Ulster Bank's bank insurance business from scratch was great fun. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I mean, the words I'd put on it would be, a great adventure, loads of autonomy, buckets of learning. I've still a lot of dear friends from that time, and some of the greatest fun I ever had. I mean, some of the funniest moments, some of the most joyful moments in my career happened in that time, particularly from 91 to probably 98, 99. That was just a great time. And it was an important time for me because I had young kids. We were at that homemaking stage and I wasn't stressed. I was working hard, but I wasn't stressed. And it was I didn't realize it at the time, but it was the perfect context for me in a large corporate. In effect, I was self-employed in a large corporate. That's the way I look at it. And I had nobody, we were making it up as we went along. It was just such great fun. I could talk to you for hours about it because I often reflect on it, and I'm terribly grateful that I did have that time, to be honest.
Yeah.
That was one. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. No, go ahead. Yeah.
Another one was later on in that same career, I got the opportunity to bring 6 businesses together in Ulster Bank. And that was a sort of a big shift forward for me. And we called it Ulster Bank Wealth Management. And the words I'd put on that would be, it was a real stretch. So it was a bit more stressful. I would call it a healthy stress, but it was a stretch. There was a lot of diversity. I was based in Belfast as well as Dublin. And for those who understand Irish politics, and it was at the time of the peace process. So I had staff from all sides of the divide. I was Paddy Irishman from Dublin, Catholic Paddy Irishman from Dublin, and seen that way by some of my businesses in the north. And Ulster Bank is traditionally a Protestant bank, and it's a fabulous place. So all of that, being in the middle of that cocktail was incredibly stretching, often very tricky. But good fun. I'd have to say I'd look back on it fondly, but I probably had a few more sleepless nights in that time, but certainly really happy with it. And the below the line journey, you mentioned it at the very start, Sylvia, I mean, has just been great because it's been real purpose driven. It's been built around friendships. We have gone out unapologetically to make a real difference in people's lives and in people's businesses. And I've enjoyed the travel and the diversity of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really super. And I think it was below the line that where our paths first crossed, and when you came to Bermuda. How would you describe your Bermuda experience and working with clients here over the last couple of years?
Well, it's so, I'll tell you, I don't know if I ever shared this with you, but in 2009, when I set out to do what I now do, I created a vision board. I won't bore you with I won't pull it out, but this is a vision board that I put together. It's now faded, but that's 11 years old, that vision board with images stuck on it. So 11 years ago, and you'll probably remind me the first time I was in Bermuda, but I'm thinking it's about 4 years ago, thereabouts. Yeah. On my vision board, I have stuck a picture of Elbow Beach on it. Wow. Which is sort of weird. Like, I didn't even know where Elbow Beach was. And the next thing I find myself on it. So, my time in Bermuda has, I mean, it's been great. I mean, what's been great about it is a couple of things. I think one is seeing a lot of Irish on the island, seeing the diversity of the island, being able to do the work I love doing on the island. Look, working in an island like Bermuda is so different than, even going to mainland US or going into mainland Europe. To be honest, you could be anywhere, but when you're in somewhere like Bermuda, you're not just anywhere. Like, the reality is there isn't, when you stand on any part of the island and look around, you're in a place that's a lot different than most places. And it's, it was beautiful. I love the intimacy of it. I love the fact that a lot of people know lots of people. So through you, I've, been able to work with many people on the island, and I keep in touch with them, and they seem to all know each other and know what each other is at. And that's sort of nice to dip in and out of, I have to say. So I have to say, absolutely some of the real highlights in terms of pictures in my head of, getting up in the morning and diving into the sea, or spending time with one of your client teams on a beach and working with them. You pinch yourself to do that type of work. I mean, you come back here to Ireland, and I love Ireland to bits, and you tell people you've been on a pink sanded beach with a team working with them, and they can't get their head around that at all.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, so it's very, very, very happy memories, and absolute highlights compared to anything else I've done. Yeah.
Super. Going back a little bit to career advice, if you were your 25-year-old self, what advice would you go back and give yourself or others at that age? And
I have a 25-year-old here in the house. I have a 29-year-old here in the house, and I have a 32-year-old who's married and lives down in Limerick, on the south of this island in Ireland. And I think the general advice I've given them would be the same advice, and that is, make sure your career enables the life you're trying to create. That's the fundamental advice I'd give. Make sure your career enables the life you're trying to create. And don't see it as one-dimensional. In other words, the career is not just about career. It's about enabling something else. And whilst a career in itself can be very rewarding, and mine thankfully has, it's always been about something more than my career. So that sort of gives it a meaning. And the other two is, particularly in the times we're in now, is be open to evolving and pivoting. Just be open to the idea that, like, I spent, I think, too long in financial services. Now, I don't say that with regret, but the best part of 30 years in financial services, and I was happy to do a pivot right out of it. And so now I have two financial services clients, but I basically spend no time in financial services. And in the first 4 years of the current work I do, I purposely didn't take on a single financial services client. So I think be ready to pivot, be ready to take new opportunities, and to do that strategically. In other words, not just do it for the sake of doing it, but to do it because it's in helping you enable a life you're trying to create. They'd be probably the two pieces of advice I'd give.
Yeah, super. Moving on to networking, obviously throughout everything that you've done, you've met with a lot of people and interacted with them in various different ways and levels. How has networking come easily to you? It sounds like it has, but how has it impacted your overall success, would you say?
I would say networking singularly has been the biggest reason for me having a successful career. Now, what I mean by successful is, being able to do what I do well, like whether that's been in sales and achieve targets, or even build our own business and below the line and win clients. I would say networking has been singularly the most important thing. I mean, the reason you and I know each other is through James, and the reason I know James is through, another network that I'm in, and so on. So I think absolutely huge. I think I was fortunate in that the early part of my career, I came into sales, and I unapologetically believe that, for young people, if they can get into sales at any level, even for a part of their early career, it's incredibly valuable to understand how to win a client. I think anyone who has an ability to win a client, to network with people and win a client, that's the value of that, I think, is nearly more the case now. It's more valuable now than it's ever been. So I think I was lucky in that I didn't know any different. Networking has just been critically important to me. And I'm not sometimes when people think of networking, they think of going to big networking events with a pile of business cards, handing them out and having frivolous conversations. I hate that type of stuff. So I don't network like that at all. I mean, my network is very organic. It comes from the clubs I'm in, the people I hang around with, the sharing of stories, bumping into, when I first got to know James, for example, it was just a sharing of, what do you do? Gosh, this is what I do. That's interesting. There might be a way of joining the dots here. And it's a mindset of connecting. And I think if you can do that, you don't have to be at networking events. I tend to gravitate away from networking events, but I gravitate towards the idea of an opportunity to connect with people and share a story and understand where someone's at. And I think a sort of a golden rule around networking is be a giver, not a taker. There's a lot of takers in the networking field. So they're looking for stuff. So when I bump into people who are always looking for stuff from me, I tend to eventually move away from them because I want that to be a two-way street. So I think I learned early in my career was be a giver. So contribute into networks, contribute to people, offer them thoughts, send them stuff. Don't be looking for stuff back. What goes around will come around in its own way. It may not come directly from the person you've sent something to, but put stuff out there and it will come back to you. So I'm a real believer in that.
Yeah, that's so true.
So be a giver, not a taker. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. It's more difficult, is it fair to argue, to network and to make that happen now, that so much is being conducted via Zoom or remotely, and how can people be more bring more of their selves and the reality of who they are to the experience when things are done in a way that's a little bit more disconnected than we've been used to?
Yeah, it's a good question. I can only think of what I'm doing now. So I have my groups of people that I connect with, and so there's that group, there's those groups that I connect with. I'm thinking of about 4 or 5 groups. That there's a group I have breakfast with every Friday morning, and we still have breakfast every Friday morning. We just do it on Zoom. James will know some of these characters. Last Friday morning, we all sat in a Zoom call, eating our porridge and having a chat and having a laugh, and stuff came up and it was very interesting, and all sorts of things happen in that, but it's always a laugh. There's another group I'm meeting a Wednesday night tonight, and we meet and we call it a men's shed. This has happened in COVID. We're just a group of people, a group of men that meet, and there's never an agenda, but there's always an amazing conversation, and we love it. And we've sort of gone to places that you'd go to maybe over a pint, but we're not over a pint. But sometimes somebody has a beer in their hand, and that's cool too. And the other thing I think is about use the technology, in that I've a little bit more time in my hands, like most people do, to actually think about people and say, oh, I've read that article, I think I'll send that to Sylvia. Or we'll put something out there like you're doing. We'll run webinars, you're running webinars. So put stuff out. It's not an expensive thing to do. People have more time. And so I think it's common sense stuff. And it's okay to reach out to somebody and say, hey, have you got a half an hour for a coffee over Zoom? Let's just have a chat. People will very openly say, yeah, why not do that? Because all the other meetings I'm going to have an agenda on them, and there's business to be talked about. And it'd be nice to just chill out and have a coffee. Sometimes I find myself walking around the park, and I've got my earplugs in, and I'm having a chat with a friend just to catch up with them and say, hey, I rang you just see how you're doing. And they're going, oh, did you? And they haven't had a call. They haven't had anyone who's rung them up to see how they're doing. And that could be a client, could be a friend, could be both, doesn't really matter. So I don't think technology is as big is in the way as much as people think. And that's through my own experience, because a lot of people think it's in our way. And look, it's certainly different. Yes, it would be much easier if we could physically meet, but it's not in the way as much as people think. If we could just change our mindsets around it sometimes and say, it's okay to pick up it's okay to have informal chats on Zoom. It's okay to, pick up the phone ad hoc and say, hey, listen, have you got 5 minutes? Yeah, great. Let's have a chat. I don't have an agenda. I was checking in to see how you're doing. That can be the most delightful call to get. Someone was actually thinking of you, which is what great networking's about.
Yeah, that's lovely.
Keep it simple. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And so finally, Dave, if I was to ask you 5 words to describe your career overall, what would they be?
5 words to describe my career. I would say 5 words to describe my career. Fun. It's been a lot of fun. It's been unpredictable. So when I started in 1979 and someone said, by the way, at 58 years of age, you'll be sitting in your home office dealing with businesses all over the world, I would have gone, how would that happen? In fact, if you had said that to me 20 years ago, I would have still said, how would that happen? So unpredictable. Another word, friendship, would definitely be one. Sense of friendship. Networking is definitely a big word. I've built some, I'd probably like yourselves on this call, I've just built a massive network of people that I'm incredibly grateful for, because there's an awful lot of psychological safety in that. There's a lot of comfort in knowing that you know lots of people, that you can reach out to lots of people, that if you ask lots of people for help, they'd give it to you. And that's how I got this business off the ground, is I asked people for help and they said, absolutely. So that'd be another word. Integrated would be another word I'd use, which is the idea that my career, for the most part, has been an integrated part of my life. It's not been I don't see myself as a career person, if you like. Look, when people who know me don't sort of see me through the lens of a career as such, and definitely less so in the last 11 years than maybe prior to that. So very, very integrated. I mean, so much so that my kids don't even know what I do. Do you know what I mean? Like, they sort of broadly know what I do. But if you ask them, what exactly does Dave do? How does he actually earn money? I'm not sure they could actually describe it, because they don't see, I don't wear that, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So integrated definitely would be one. And very incredibly rewarding. I mean, at so many levels, not just financially. In fact, probably less so financially. I've always had enough, and I'm grateful for that. But it's been very rewarding at a personal level, just incredibly rewarding. And it's been great fun. So there's been many times, like going down to Bermuda. You know, if I go down to Bermuda and I work for a couple of days down there, like, to be honest, that's a combination of work and pleasure, no matter what way you dress that up. Because I'm with people I like to be with, yourselves, for example. You're doing work you love doing, and you're in a place you'd love to be. You know, so that's for me an example of the integration.
Fabulous. Well, listen, Dave, thank you so much for joining us. I wish you all the best of success with your continued work at Below the Line. It's been lovely listening to your journey really so far, which is just fascinating and inspiring in a way to know that people can bring about change. And it's about being motivated to do so and figuring out what's right for them. But thank you. And thank you for everyone for joining us today and for listening to us here on the Career Scoop. This is brought to you by Elevate Career Advice and Elevate Executive Selection. I'm Sylvia Jones and James Fitzsimons, and we hope you've enjoyed listening to us. Tune in for another episode next week. We hope you'll join us.